One of the girls literally tells the main character that her virginity can only be taken away if a man penetrates her. Girl, what are you on about? Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Zulqaif and you're watching Zulqaif Plus, the internet corner where we read, rant, and dissect pop culture in the context of literature. And today we're talking about how Sydney Sweeney got it all wrong, the rise of conservatism in Gen Z, the problem that everybody overlooked with this novel, and how anti-feminism is the root of all of this. But first, let's talk about today's hot topic, Sydney Sweeney and her Nazi genes. Funny enough, this isn't the first time that our girlie is wrapped up in some Republican drama. Back in 2020, on her mom's 60th birthday party, some photos circulated around where people were wearing Maga hats, and she made this tweet to clear things up. You guys, this is wild. An innocent celebration for my mom's milestone 60th birthday party has turned into an absurd political statement, which was not the intention. Please stop making assumptions. She didn't particularly condemn the Maga movement. She just got mad at people for assuming her political stance because she was surrounded by a bunch of Nazis. Folks came forward with the fact that sometimes people have conservative family members that they walk into in gatherings. Fair enough, but it goes deeper than that. Just this year, Sydney partnered with a soap brand, specifically men's soap brand, called Dr. Squatch, and released a soap that contained a percentage of her bathwater. Seriously? Bathwater? What's next? Clone with a percentage of her sweat? I wouldn't be surprised. This has been in conversation how certain women in the entertainment industry present themselves in such a way that specifically panders to the male gaze. A recent victim of this is Sabrina Carpenter with her upcoming album Man's Best Friend. In a way, this is also policing how women are supposed to live their lives. After all, Sabrina Carpenter and Sydney Sweeney have autonomy on what kind of media they're associating themselves to. Internet girlies are always fighting about whether this is feminist or anti-feminist, because on one hand, they are displaying this hot, attractive, stereotypical woman with quote-unquote perfect features that's harming the feminist movement in a way that it sets up all women to unrealistic beauty standards. While on the other hand, this is also feminist in context of choice feminism that states that all choices are feminist as long as a woman made them. So it starts to get into murky waters around here. Because like they're actively using their right to choose, and isn't that what feminism is at its core? That women get to choose what they want to do. But this isn't Barbie, and things are not so simple. Sydney Sweeney's most recent controversy is the American Eagle ad that many have referred to as a Nazi dog whistle. There are some short videos where she's just walking around in suggestive ways with a voiceover saying that Sydney Sweeney has great genes. And then there's one where she's just lying down and well, this is how it goes.
Genes are passed down from parents to offspring, often determining traits like hair color, personality, and even eye color. My genes are blue.
Sydney Sweeney has great genes.
So yeah, in today's political climate, I definitely don't see anything wrong with people finding a problem with this. What makes it particularly problematic and no longer just a feminist issue is the fact that it's about eugenics now, something that has been used against people in history, and now with the whole Zionist movement against the Palestinians. Yeah, it's certainly icky and problematic. And to top things off, BuzzFeed released an article confirming that Sydney Sweeney is a registered Republican since 2024. Doesn't look very good on her part, to be honest. Her brand hinges on hot girl Americana, and she stays silent when that aesthetic overlaps white supremacy, and it ends up raising a lot of questions. Conservatism is making its way back into popularity, all thanks to the Gen Z, the generation that's supposedly the most woke of all. Amongst all the microtrends on TikTok, you'll find hints of all sorts that trace back to the traditional conservatism. One of the biggest examples is the tread wife trend that depicts a very romanticized version of baking bread from scratch. You might argue that it's the same as baking the banana bread trend during the pandemic, but it's not. It's really not, and I'll tell you why, but first let's talk about the Treadwife. Ballerina Farm is a Treadwife influencer on TikTok who left her lifestyle and became a Treadwife and has 8 kids. A while ago, her interview with The Times got really popular, where it's mentioned that sometimes she gets so exhausted and has to stay in bed for days. And it really shows how whatever cottagecore bullshit you're seeing on TikTok is not an ounce of how it's like in real life. Like, of course, if you're a grown adult, you're going to consume that sort of media differently. But for young women, this sort of media can have a very very negative impact, almost on the lines of indoctrination and propaganda. I'm saying this because what these trad wives are showing on social media is a very glamorized version of how a stay-at-home mom life is like. This only leads to women ending up in situations that they didn't really know the reality or the consequences of in the first place. And this whole thing is specific to one demographic while it's marketed to everyone around the world. And I'll get back to that later. If you look up clean girl aesthetic on Pinterest, you'll see variations of a handful of things, including but not limited to white woman in a cream colored clothing, some tulips, a tray of skincare cosmetics, and of course a glass of matcha. I would say that this is just an evolution of the hyper-femininity trend, and it's just a way to set women's rights back 200 years. I talked about choice feminism earlier in this video, but this should not be confused with that. Look, the internet is a bubble where you choose to show parts of your life that you're comfortable with, and we as consumers of that media often overlook that. I talked about the lipstick effect that happens during an economic downfall in my previous video, and I would go as far as saying that the rise of conservatism in Gen Z is definitely a recession indicator. This whole cottagecore propaganda provides space for delusions of grandeur, of owning a farm, making your food from scratch without having to worry about money. It gives people the delusion of old money, and hence it is popular. For a generation that literally yearns to rent an apartment and a trip to the grocery store, conservatism is a heaven in disguise. That's because the conservative life depicted on TikTok is a curated version that glamorizes it, overlooking all the ugly parts where women don't have life savings, no passions in the real life, and are stuck in the kitchen while raising multiple children all at once. Even if you are to enforce the notion that this is still feminist as all these women are choosing that lifestyle, it only goes as far as white feminism. Take Nora Smith for instance. Even though she isn't white, her entire brand is just repackaged white feminism. For disabled, queer, and other racial groups of women, this idea of conservative life is not possible outside of TikTok, because at its core, it belongs to white women. This version of domestic femininity is tailor-made for those who already hold societal privilege, women who won't be punished for staying at home, who can afford to aestheticize homemaking, who are never questioned for choosing tradition because the tradition was always designed for them. But for the queer woman, trans woman, working class woman, and the woman of color, this isn't cozy or nostalgic. It's unsafe and it's inaccessible. And historically, it is violent. The trad by fantasy doesn't come with the same consequences for everyone. That's why this whole conservative Gen Z wave, whether it's Sydney Sweeney leaning into the Americana imagery or the TikTok girlies cosplaying 1950s housewives, needs to be interrogated. Because it's not just about choice anymore. It's about what gets uplifted as beautiful, correct, and aspirational, and who gets erased in the process. And that brings us to the novel I Who Have Never Known Men, a book that many people have labeled as a feminist classic, but when you sit down and try to unpack it, you start to realize that it is not feminist at all. In fact, it quietly upholds the same conservative values that this Gen Z trad wave is obsessed with. I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman is a dystopian novel that's about 40 women who are locked in an underground bunker for unspecified reasons. It's narrated by a nameless teenager, the youngest among them all, who also happens to be the most clever. This also makes the others single her out as she's way out of their age group. One day these women get to leave the bunker, and that is pretty much what happens at the beginning of the book. It's divided in 3 parts, and the first part shows their time inside the bunker. At the beginning of the novel, they've been trapped inside the bunker for say 12 years at least, and they have no idea why. There's vague mentions that they were drugged when they were taken here, and that has removed most of their memories. The narrator tells us of the routines in the bunker and how she doesn't know life as the others know it, as she was brought in at a very young age. She has an unhealthy obsession with the guards, the men who keep an eye on them. And then she tells us that again and again and again, until at the end of part 1 a siren goes off and one of the guards while fleeing the bunker drops the keys near the cage. I want to keep my review limited to the context of today's video and how I didn't find the book very feminist as readers and critics seem to say. The earliest red flag in the book is how the narrator that constantly tells us how she hasn't experienced the world as the other women have seems to conform to the same heteronormative lifestyle. There's a part where the book talks about how these women no longer care about how they look or want to present themselves in a certain way because they are no longer seen by men. Like, excuse me? Women can and do want to feel pretty in their own skin, and I found that remark very bothersome. The main character never thinks about her looks until she sees a mirror at the end of the novel, and she cannot tell if that is what pretty is supposed to look like, as all the women had told her so. But here's the problem. In the first part of the book, she tries to seduce one of the guards. So she's probably aware of these looks when it comes to men, but when she's on her own, she's unable to make a judgment or appreciation. She develops a habit of making up scenarios in her head with the guards, which lead her to have explosions, which is a metaphor for having orgasms. But simultaneously, she has absolutely no idea that she has genitals until like half of the book. Most of her experiences are centered around heteronormative ideas, and when men are taken out of the equation, she doesn't really know what to do with herself. The women are also portrayed as dumb caricatures that need to be guided, and the relationships that they have with each other are pointless. This book has this underlying theme that apparently women can only have meaningful relationships with men. The main character is unable to make any relationship with any of these women because none of them are men. For instance, the main character had more chemistry with the nameless, personality-less guard in the bunker than any of the women that she has spent all her life with. For a book that's supposed to be about someone who has never known men, it spends a great deal talking about them. This book lacks depth in a lot of areas, as it misses multiple opportunities to explore human condition outside the male gaze. Queerness is simply not a thing in this novel, and for someone who hasn't experienced the world as we know it, should be more prone to having those experiences, since it wouldn't come with the stigma or the stereotypes. But we never go there. One of the girls literally tells the main character that her virginity can only be taken away if a man penetrates her. Girl, what are you on about? This book felt like it exists within a vacuum, and the moment you try to start thinking critically, the entire novel starts to fall apart. That is all for today's video. If you guys liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if there's anything that you would like to add to this conversation, drop it in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts. Until my next video, goodbye!